The lone Kentucky police officer who was charged in connection with the botched police raid that killed 26-year-old Breonna Taylor as she slept in her own home in March 2020. Well, he has been acquitted of all charges. Brett Hankison, a now former Louisville detective, let's put up his picture here. Yes, he had been fired for shooting blindly during the raid that killed Taylor. And when asked during the trial if he did anything wrong at all, well, Hankison said absolutely not. Let's turn to what the AP has to say. So Hankison, 45, has been charged with 3 counts of wanton endangerment for firing through sliding glass side doors and a window of Taylor's apartment during the raid. Multiple bullets pierced the wall of a neighboring apartment, and prosecutors said Hankison endangered the lives of a pregnant woman, her young child, and her boyfriend who lived there. Hankison's attorneys never contested the ballistic evidence, but said he fired 10 bullets because he thought his fellow officers were being executed. One of those officers, Sergeant John Mattingly, was hit in the leg by a bullet from a handgun fired by Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, who said he thought intruders were breaking in. And apparently the jury here sided with Hankison, believing essentially that he thought his fellow officers were under siege. And this is essentially what we know about the deliberations that just went down yesterday. The panel of 8 men and 4 women delivered its verdict for Brett Hankison about 3 hours after it took the case, following closing arguments from prosecution and defense attorneys. That's right, just 3 hours of deliberation. That really makes you think whether they fully considered the evidence before them. But also bear in mind that none of the officers involved in killing Taylor were actually charged with her death. Also, Hankison did not fire any of these bullets that killed Taylor, but with his acquittal, essentially what we know is that this likely closes the door for prosecuting the officers involved in the raid at the state level, because this acquittal here was for state charges. There is an ongoing federal investigation right now by DOJ looking into whether this botched raid was a possible civil rights violation when it comes to Taylor's rights, and also whether the police department there in Louisville has bigger problems. That entire department is under investigation by the feds right now. But still, this acquittal here, it seems to leave very little hope for Taylor's loved ones. Let's look at what Taylor's mother did in response to the verdict. So Taylor's mother, Tamika Palmer, and a group of friends and family, they left quickly without commenting after the verdict. Hankison did not appear outside the courtroom after the verdict was read, but his attorney, Stuart Matthews, said that he and Hankison were thrilled and asked what might have swayed the jury. Well, Matthews replied, "I think it was absolutely the fact that he was doing his job as a police officer." Doing his job indeed by spraying bullets into homes, knowing there were people living there beyond just the individual that he was going there to execute the warrant for. Yeah, so we have to remember though that this case, it didn't center Taylor at all. And with the prosecution's presentation of the evidence, we got to see that. Essentially what we know is that prosecutors stressed in opening statements that the case wasn't about Taylor's death or the police decision that led to the raid. Jurors were shown a single image of her body, barely discernible at the end of the hallway. Taylor had been settling down for bed when officers arrived at her door. She was shot multiple times in her hallway, and she in fact died at the scene. Let's go ahead and take a look at these men who did kill Taylor, the ones whose bullets were responsible for her death. We have Mattingly, pictured on the right, and Officer Miles Cosgrove on the left. Now, neither of these men testified at Hankison's trial, essentially pleading the Fifth Amendment in light of the ongoing FBI civil rights investigation. But we have to ask ourselves, really, was this verdict shocking? And for a lot of people there in Louisville, it was not shocking at all, because we have not seen justice for Breonna Taylor, and why we would think it would show up now is beyond us. Let's go ahead and see what the local said. So Siddiqui Reynolds, president and CEO of the Louisville Urban League, said the verdict didn't surprise her. Black residents of the city, she explained, had already been experiencing a certain amount of frustration because no officer had been charged for Taylor's death. Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher said the verdict added to the frustration and anger of many over the inability to find more accountability for the tragic events of March 13th, 2020. Indeed, it seems that there is no accountability, especially when it comes to these officers. Kyla.
My heart and condolences go out to Breonna Taylor's family and the state-sanctioned suffering they had to endure. And like you said before, there are no systems in place to hold people like these cops accountable. They continue to turn a blind eye to the misconduct and criminal behavior in these institutions and therefore endorse this violence. Like you said before, he said, I think it was absolutely the fact that he was doing his job as a police officer, killing people, shooting into their houses. This isn't a system that can be reformed. And why? Because even with the ban for no-knock warrants that was signed by Kentucky Governor Beshear, there still permits no-knock warrants in the case of whether the person is going to be convicted for a violent offense, or if the cops think their lives are in danger. And we know that cops lie and abuse their power all the time. And so this isn't a reform, it's a timer until we have another unfortunate and devastating case like Breonna Taylor's. And unfortunately, the citizens of that city will not be surprised when it happens.
Yes, and I think that a lot of us out there, we continue to see instances where justice is essentially evaded. And the thing that really resonates with me is the fact that we have Black women being murdered by police. We have Black women who suddenly are up and dying, like Sandra Bland. And there is not that full investigation and that prosecution for these lives. And we are seeing somewhat of a change, which is good when it comes to Black men who die at the hands of law enforcement. But at the same time, what about Black women? The fact is that Black women continue to be the most disrespected members of society, and the thought that our lives aren't worth essentially warranting getting justice for the taking of our lives, it continues to be echoed every day when we don't have justice for Breonna Taylor, when we don't have justice or any kind of semblance of justice for Sandra Bland, when there is no change whatsoever. And we see this play out in verdicts like this when it wasn't even directly about Breonna Taylor's life, but even this negligent behavior by this officer, it can't even be remedied with a verdict that warrants essentially punishment for this behavior. Any closing words, Kyla?
It's just, again, like you said before, really hard to be a Black woman in America, knowing that there are no systems to protect us, to protect the ones that we've lost, and to protect all the women who will come after us. And I really hope that this country really takes a long, hard look at this case and does something different.
Yeah, we will see. It is in DOJ's hands now, and let's hope that justice is done at the end of the day. But hey, I wouldn't be surprised if it's not.